Hello, good afternoon, good morning.
Hello.
Morning, guys.
Good morning. Give a couple minutes here for more folks to show up.
Hi.
And just as a reminder to folks, if you have something you want to add to the agenda, you can add that here at this link. And if you could add your name and what have you, if you're in the attendee section.
Hey, Brian, are transcripts on? Is that possible? As opposed to taking notes?
That is a great question. Oh, I can't even see how to claim host anymore. I used to know how to use this stuff. Ah, there it is. Seems like transcript might be on. All right, cool. Well, we can go ahead and get started. Good morning, afternoon, and evening. This is the Runwazi community meeting. We have I linked to our my brain is not working today, to our agenda in the chat. Also, if you would like to join on Slack, we have a Slack channel in the CNCF community Slack under the Runwazi channel. Okay, and if folks would like to add themselves to the attendee section, that'll be amazing. And with that, we can kick this off. Are there any new members here? New people on the call? You don't have to say yes, but if you'd like to, you can introduce yourself. Okay, I don't see anybody saying anything.
Hi, I'm new here. So sorry, I was just typing. I missed, unfortunately, the first meeting, and the last meeting was postponed. So this is my first meeting. Great to be here. I'm Sven from Liquid Reply. A lot of folks I have already met at KubeCon and Wasm Day, so a lot of familiar faces. And so I have a little operator that installs Runwazi-based chimps on different Kubernetes clusters. And therefore I'm very interested in the development of Runwazi.
Wonderful, welcome.
Is that project KWASM?
Yeah, it's KWASM.
Yep, I just wanted to call it out for folks. If you drop a link, I'm sure if anybody hasn't seen it, they'd love to go check it out. In fact, I'd love to get more involved over there. It's good stuff. I think it's a really nice way to drop the bins and do the configuration needed for the shims. Way to go! Thank you.
Yeah, and it could really use some testing and version updates regularly. As you know, it's a fast-moving ecosystem.
Yeah, feel free to drop that link in the agenda as well, so so folks can come back to that and take a look.
Yeah, there was a nice podcast podcast that you were on where you were discussing it.
With
There's-
Raw Code, with David Flanagan.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was great.
Cool. Anybody else wanted to introduce themselves? Okay, that's cool as well. All right, so looks like we have a couple of items on the agenda. The first one is going to be this mixed container pods. If Sven would like to talk about that since they put it on there. Yeah, take it away.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how this format is working, but what I found very interesting is this issue in the Runwazi repository, which is talking about having a pod with WebAssembly or Runwazi shim and standard Linux container. In Kubernetes, that's very important to enable sidecar integration patterns like service meshes, like Dapper integration, and so on. So that's something I really would like to have. With Wasm Edge, we already have this with the C1 integration, so not Runwazi. With Runwazi, there is this Yuki enabled Wasm Edge shim. And there I've already tried. You just need to add another handler and it would theoretically work. Problem is, I guess Wasm Edge is the only shim that's using Yuki right now. So it would only be able to enable the Wasm Edge shim and not the others. And yeah, so don't know if this is just in space for open discussion or if we just postpone it to somewhere.
No, I think it's great. We can talk about it. I think we have all the right folks on the call for that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be great. At least for me, if you can give a little bit more context about what's Yuki, because I'm not familiar with that specific project. So that would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If somebody else wants, I don't want to interrupt the call here. Okay, so Yuki is a container runtime like C1, like Run-C. It's pretty much OCI compliant. And the interesting part is the Run container. That's part of this project. It's written in Rust and it enables you to start Linux containers. And the Wasm Edge shim, there we had a contribution from one of the Yuki maintainers who enabled the lib container in this shim to make it more OCI compliant. So enable more features that were not in the first implementation of the shim.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so just to kind of kick off the discussion there, what I feel like we could do is kind of handle this automatically, as I mentioned in the issue, but I do see the concerns about not doing it implicitly. That is to say, not just automatically executing OCI container or Linux containers from the Runwazi runtime, just because people can do unexpected things. I'm kind of still a little bit contemplating the implications of automatic versus not. I kind of want to have a zero config solution for that, but can definitely see concerns. I don't know if anybody else.
Yeah, just to open up this last comment a bit. So I tend to agree that it would definitely be kind of the fastest way forward to just make Runwazi support also running like regular containers. But I was just worried about a few things, and one of them would be that would this kind of like open up like a completely new like bug domain for us if we needed also to worry about all the corner cases and such for the regular containers. Another was this, that if it caused any security issues for us, because in a sense, one of the key promises was that this is kind of a double sandbox in a sense if you run code within the runtime. So if you kind of can just get out of that. And one extra bit of information, because I was evaluating a bit or looking at NRI, which is the new Containerd plugin technology, which kind of like allows you to modify the requests on the fly based on these plugins which are running there. And that doesn't work with this. It doesn't allow changing the handlers. So it is of no use here. So just wanted to mention that.
There was a hand raise.
Brian, can you clarify what's the automatic and non-automatic thing you mentioned before?
Sure. So one thing I suggested, excuse me, is to kind of just detect if the command that we're being asked to execute is a Linux ELF binary, and if so, using that to spin up the Linux runtime versus the WASI runtime. Yeah, and I guess the other option would be having some annotation on the pod that gets passed down to our runtime, be like, okay, yeah, we'll allow that. Possibly some other alternatives could be having separate runtime classes, like where with different configs, essentially that get passed down to our runtime. That one's a little more hairy, just because I think it's still true that cry will pass down in a run C config in all cases instead of a specific runtime config.
And from my experience from this approach with C1, it's pretty hard to debug if your container is not starting and you don't know which handler was selected, if you have an automatic selection and then need to debug that handler. So do it transparently. If it works, would be fine, but I totally agree with the security implications. And if it not works, debugging isn't easier. Okay, so then I would say I at least talked a little bit about that. So we can just add things to the issue if you have, I would say, an enlightening moment and think that's the way to go. But for now, I think it will be an edge case, right?
Yeah, so I think there's probably a fast path forward to do something. We could at least, regardless of what CRI does, we could at least make something work with CTR and get stuff rolling that way. And that would just essentially be, well, we'll just pass down an extra config to allow the RunC or whatever, or the Yuki executor to handle it. But it's, yeah, just a thought.
David?
Yeah, I think that I like the idea that hey, let's get a fast path, prototype something out, see how it works. At the same time, it would be nice to see this perhaps start as a proposal as well. Like, hey, let's suss out the proposal, what we really want to do. In the first round of it doesn't have to be like the best possible solution. It could just be like, hey, we can show this works. Is it really the right way to do it? Maybe not, and then we can learn from it and iterate. I'd hate to see good be or perfect be the enemy, good be the perfect enemy, the enemy of perfect or whatever. You know what I'm getting at. Sorry, I totally butchered that.
Yes. So how about an toggle at build time that we can enable or disable this feature? So that you definitely build a cluster on purpose and not by accident.
I think that sounds totally reasonable. Feature flag it. We can test it out, see how it goes.
Yeah, and I think that would be like a great idea to try it out and see. Then we get like more data points that if it makes sense or and what kind of trouble we will run into or if there would be any trouble. But it also seems to me that I was reading through this runtime class GEP and they say there that the reason why it is pod specific and not container specific flag is that they're worried about the virtual machines where the sharing of, let's say, loopback interface cannot happen. But if we are not in that case, then in principle, there should be nothing preventing sharing of the namespaces, like between run BASI and, let's say, run C. So in principle, this could also be solved on another layer, like in container D or so.
That sounds like that would be a more longer term, like as like when we think about the proposal and like, hey, this is how we'd actually want to solve it. It could be like, this is probably going to take months for us to do if we're going to solve it the quote unquote right way. But initially we can iterate through, and I think those are absolutely awesome points as well.
Then I would take away from this discussion. We just try to make something work with behind the feature flag to see how it behaves, and then think about if OCI is the right layer, or if maybe in CRI it is possible, and then slowly moving forward in the direction where we can more standardize it. Then I'd like to thank you for the discussion and hand over to the next point.
All right, thanks, Sven, and everybody. Just give a little airtime to, was there anything anybody else wanted to add to that? Looks like brain is not working.
Joe has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I just quickly want to mention who wants to drive this proposal and the feature flag implementation.
So if anybody volunteers, I would be happy. Otherwise, I can just drive that. Almost
Then I will
expected
help
that.
you on that. I will volunteer myself.
Awesome. All right. Next topic. David, WASM apps packaged as OCI artifacts.
Yes, so a little background on this. Talking with the Spin folks, they're really excited about packaging up WASM applications as OCI artifacts, as opposed to the way we do it today, where we're just laying out file gzips layers. And I think this makes a lot of sense, particularly when we start to see more adoption of components as opposed to just core WASM applications. However, I think they're, having discussed this a little bit with some of the folks here, it sounds like this is going to be, there's probably going to need to be changes higher than just the shim or at the shim layer. And the suggestions from talking with Radu of Fermyon Spin was interested in possibly having like Spin or the shim actually pull the bundle and unwrap everything as opposed to what we do today. And I'm not sure that I'm too excited about that idea. I would rather see a solution where it wasn't necessarily dependent on each app runtime to have to understand OCI or understand anything. I think it's a break between the layers of abstraction. And I'm just curious. I wanted to discuss it and get other points of view from the big brains on the call. James?
Yeah, so I kind of ran into this and I opened an issue in the containerd shims around something similar to this. I'm working on porting it all this work over to Windows, and the sample app that we have shipped with Slight does a bunch of stuff that's Linux specific inside the container. And so when I was doing that, I had to remove it and kind of make a couple little changes. But then also on the Windows side, the way the containerd snapshotter for Windows works right now is it requires very specific file format. It's like a Windows specific thing. And that won't work well if we're just having these OCI bundles with just the WASM things up there. So I put an issue out there to kind of start the conversation. So if anybody has any thoughts, they can maybe take a look at that. But I think I generally agree, like having the runtimes do the unpacking and things seems a little strange to me. But that because containerd does provide that type of functionality, but I haven't really thought hard about that one.
I think you bring up a really interesting meta point here. You didn't exactly say it, but these images should probably be OS and architecture agnostic. In the spirit of WebAssembly, we would want these not to run anywhere, right? If we package something up, there is absolutely no reason in my mind that we should have like multi-arch images for WebAssembly or multi-OS images for WebAssembly. That seems like it would be counter to the ideals that we're trying to put down here. Is that a fair representation, James?
Yeah, and I think I said that specifically in the issue, but didn't say it here. So yes, Brian.
Right.
Yeah, so one thing to consider is containerd is looking at, so they want us to be able to support the VM case and specifically the running on Secure Enclave or whatever you want to call it, with confidential compute and all that kind of stuff, which kind of has certain requirements like needing the sandbox, we'll call it, to be able to handle fetching the image and or content of the image, and that kind of stuff. So things are being thrown around on what to do, and basically the current thing put forward, not implemented or anything like that, is to essentially allow a shim to implement pull and stuff like that. So containerd can tell the shim to pull this inside the sandbox. And how that ends up happening could be, it could just be, oh, we'll just use the containerd's pull mechanism and kind of call back into containerd and pull it and all that kind of stuff. But for other cases like ours or confidential compute, there could be a lot of good reason to pull that in directly. And of course, there's all kinds of flux happening in the ecosystem with artifacts and / not artifacts, but but still artifacts and all that kind of stuff. It's really hard to say where things are going to go with all this stuff that's happening right now.
Do you have an issue in containerd that I could take a look and learn a little bit about that?
I can try and hunt one down. It may just be stuff we've talked about on the community call for Containerd.
Oh,
But I'll try to hunt one down.
So what do you feel about the Solo.io, this WASM image specification? Is that relevant still or not? Because I mean, what they have there is that they have the module, the image specification, and then the runtime, the execution environment in which to run the module. That's the config.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the question. Could you try
Yeah.
to?
Do you have a link to the image spec from Solo.io?
Yeah, I'm
So
pasting it to the chat.
Great. So Solo.io has, I would say, long time ago specified an image format where you, per annotation, declare what type of images is and what media type it is. That's, I would say, interesting for to choose the right runtime for this image, but it would be automatic. And it would have the same security implications that I can just write an image that then forces the container runtime to use a specific handler without the user wants it. But the discussion we have right now is composable images, right? That you don't have the layers stacked, but you have like the modules, it's composable, and therefore the shim needs to pull it on its own because only the shim knows how to resolve it. And I don't know if the if somebody is still working on the WASM container spec. So I have not seen an implementation so far.
Okay,
So-
thanks.
We've been discussing stuff like this in the Bytecode Alliance SIG registry. And I linked into chat a proposal that I've started for OCI v1.1 support. And this starts down the path of laying out what components look like within an OCI registry, and then what interfaces, component interfaces, as well as bundled applications. I would like very much to standardize how these are packaged up across, the entire ecosystem. And that's the intent of that proposal, and to implement it for SIG registry. James?
I think that was one of the things when I read over the proposal last week, and I wasn't clear on how these components were going to be pulled and kind of morphed into the way that the shims end up using them. And so it sounds like that kind of dovetails into this conversation a little bit around, like, if we have this image format in the WARG OCI registry thing, then how do they get pulled? It's a relevant conversation. So I don't have anything else to say, but it was that was the thing that popped out at me when I read that.
That is exactly why bringing this up in this this setting, because we need to figure out how those actually get pulled, how we actually lay them out, and then use them, right?
Anybody else have any thoughts on this topic? So definitely, I'm gonna take a look at your BCA proposal. Let you know if I have any feedback there.
Yeah, please tear it up. I have a lot of content to address, or a lot of feedback to address there. But it's a start down the path, and then as we start to coalesce around it, then we'll get the implementation in SIG registry. And we're hoping to get registries stood up in, I would say, probably the next month to be able to prototype on. So that project's moving pretty quickly. If folks are interested in that, in those ideas and what a registry looks like for WASM components, I highly recommend digging in there, or maybe even joining the call if you're so inclined.
When are these registry meetings?
I believe they're Wednesdays. BCA SIG registry meetings are Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Let me see if I can grab this out.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's a little tougher to find the BCA meetings and how to get the invites and stuff like that. It's not quite as fluid as the CNCF yet. We're hoping to set up like Google groups and stuff, so you can just like subscribe just the same way as you and CNCF. But it's a work in progress.
All right. Let me get back to doc. And looks like that was our last topic. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to bring up? Going once.
One thing that I had in mind was that it was a great job that we got the UKIT lib container, the support merged in, so that was huge. But I think the question is now that what's the next step there? So we now got like a bunch of this OCI support for various things. So should we start like writing validation tests or maybe writing the support for WASM time, or how do we want to go forward? Because it seems that if we want to go all into the lib container, then we can kind of drop a lot of code from Runwasi.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be good to get the WASM time stuff in there as well. And then we can look at abstractions for common behavior that right now the big thing is we get an OCI spec and we need to turn it into something that WASM runtime, there's any WASM runtime, not just WASM time, understands. And so having abstractions that can kind of get rid of some of the boilerplate stuff that we have in both. We have stuff for WASM Edge and for WASM time. I think getting Yuki into WASM time will help figure out what that might need to look like. So I think that's a good next step. And we may need to look at, are we getting too much from libcontainer at the moment? Do we need to go to a little bit lower down the abstraction level and not just at the executor level? That kind of stuff. All stuff to figure out. Some other stuff to look at that kind of came up in that PR is that we're not really testing the Docker scenario. I think if we can add some tests that will work with Docker, that will help a lot in terms of just making sure we're not breaking stuff when we merge things. Yeah, that's all I gotta say.
About the testing scenario, I wasn't really able to run it with the big Kubernetes distributions. So even if it's running with Docker, so there seemed something, happened that wasn't expected. So I guess we need to fix it in the future. And if we go to WASM Edge support, WASM time support, we need to make sure that it's running before that we don't need to fix it on two sides.
Yep, that makes sense. So maybe some scenario that we can, that's not just, what are we using, kind at the moment? I can't remember what the test setup is, but Something where we can spin up a full Kubernetes and make things happen. K3D. Yeah, I don't recall.
We also have it. The shims are also in Cluster API, so we could spin up Cluster API,
Yes.
actual like legit clusters.
Yep, that'd be great.
And Joe and I did some work earlier about like getting pre-kubeadm join commands to just like go and grab the bits that we want and place them on the machine, so that we could pretty easily pull that template in and be able to build like legit clusters.
Yeah, it'd be real interesting if we can get like Cluster API and get that wired up with like AKS or anybody else who wants to add stuff. Like we can run that on our Azure infrastructure, at least for AKS.
This might also be a good use case for KWASM. So as opposed to doing like the pre-kubeadm commands, we could just deploy out the operator and have it install the shims, and that would give a nice indication that KWASM is working effectively as well.
That's awesome. Yep. Oh, I did see that demo, KWASM. Yes, I did see that. Now I'm remembering. Good stuff. And Joe, I saw you had your hand raised for a second, and now it's not.
Oh, just want to clarify, sorry, going back to the previous topic of artifact. Just want to clarify if there are any action items from should, or we just need to read through the OCI stack there, the thick registry.
I think there's two, at least. One, feedback for the proposal, and corollary to that, me updating the proposal. So I got that. Two, it'd be really nice to, if somebody wants to open an issue in like Containerd or wants to actually start getting, you know, some movement towards like what do we need to do to support having a shim do pull as opposed to having you know, some other mechanism like the actual runtime doing pull. Brian, are you interested in opening up that issue? Or I don't know where the conversation was in the Containerd community call. You may have more context there.
Yeah, I'll have to, I'm gonna have to hunt down where that discussion was happening, and yeah. Try to loop everybody in.
Awesome, thank you.
All right. Any other topics anybody wanted to touch on? Oh, Joe's got another.
I just want to mention quickly that I still need to review Angel's PR to consider the license shims. That's awesome.
That's cool. Thank you. Yeah, I was planning also to add some kind of item for the next agenda to show you the shim working with Wasm Worker server. So I didn't have the things prepared for today. Sorry about that.
No, that's totally okay.
All right, anything else? Going once, going twice. All right, I think that's
I think you're mute.
Ismail.
Yeah, I think you're mute.
Oh,
Sorry. Okay, I was just saying one last thing still. So those were great links to the issues which which you had there in the chat. So just please, if you do kind of this related work, then just remember to put links to pull requests and issues and whatnot that is interesting also to the Slack channel, because it would be great to be able to kind of track the whole space somehow, what's going on. But that was the final thing. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And we could probably start a project on the repo to kind of help track what's going on across the community, not just inside the repo, but everywhere else. Yeah, if people are up for that. Right. Anything else? All right, I think we're a wrap this time. Thank you for coming. It was good to talk to everybody.
Thank you.
Excellent
so
stuff,
much.
y'all.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Hey, let's make sure the video
Bye-bye.
doesn't keep running.
Yes, yes, I will stop recording.
That's important.
Awesome.